What's going on, y'all, and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Reaction Show. My name is Andrew Velez. I'm here with my co-host, Mr. Joel Dehls. This is episode number 23 of the Fantasy Reaction Show. We are here after Monday Night Football, Chiefs versus Eagles, and you see the title, you know it's true. We're here reacting to the Chiefs gagging to the Philadelphia Eagles, scoring 17 points in the first half. Zero. I repeat, Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs offense scored 0 points in the second half versus the Philadelphia Eagles, whose defense is not good. But Mr. Dell's, before we go any deeper into this game, how are you doing tonight?
Doing good, man. Can't complain. We were in a battle this week. I know we discussed it on Thursday. We were in a battle for fantasy. I came out on top. Have the bye, so I get 2 weeks off. Get to put my feet up and just chill. But I still like your team. I like your chances. But this was a game, to say the least. It wasn't the prettiest. It was hyped up basically all season long, and it delivered at the end without a doubt. But for about 3 quarters there, we were going back and forth like this is the battle of the mids right now. But I didn't even realize the title of this until you said it, and it made me laugh. So great title.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Listen, from one competitor to the next, I congratulate you on your victory. And the 7-game win streak that I had, it was magnificent. It was a great run. Started off 0-3, 7 wins in a row. To even put myself in potential to have not just the number 1 seed, but also have a bye in our league. So again, I congratulate you. Valiant effort by me, but a great victory by you. Brock Purdy, Cowboys defense, Keenan Allen. That's just the end of how my season end, or a regular season, had come to an end. But like you said, I still like my chances come playoff time. But before we go into this game any further, today is my father's birthday. I know he'll be listening, so I want to give a shout out to my pops. Happy birthday to you. But with his birthday, I got a gift. And that gift was watching the Kansas City Chiefs lose to the Philadelphia Eagles on Monday night. Now, Joel, I know people are dying to hear what you have to say, but I would just like to go first, just in this situation. I really do appreciate it. I'm reading the comments before we start the show, and they have me cracking up. I'll read one from Josh Boateng. Drew shameless for wearing that Broncos gear, like they'll confidently make the playoffs. I don't give a shit, brother. I don't give not one shit. What I know right now is that the Broncos are arguably the hottest team in football. We're on a 4-game heater, and in that 4-game heater, we beat the Kansas City Chiefs, we beat the Bills, we beat Joel's Green Bay Packers, and we beat Minnesota, and we ended the Lynn Sanity Dobbs Sanity run. That's all I know. But here we are, Kansas City. Let's stay on topic. In the first half, they looked solid. They looked like the offense that I was expecting going up against this Philadelphia Eagles defense that secondary-wise was lackluster. They came out the first drive. They did have that 3-and-out, but then the next time that they were on the field, they drove 75 yards, were able to get into the end zone relatively easy. And then again, right before the half, they're able to score that touchdown. They go and they put 17 points up in the first half. I'm anticipating that coming to the second half, you would probably carry that over. Again, this Eagles defense has not been that great. Their rush defense has been really good, one of the best rush defenses in football. And ironically, that's what the Eagles were surrendering a ton in this first half. They had clean over 100 rushing yards in the first half allowed. Pacheco, we even saw your guy Clyde Edwards-Helaire go ahead and have some nice runs in that situation as well. So it was really interesting first half. And then the second half, the Eagles had none of it. They were allowing nothing. Now, everyone's going to say I'm hating if I don't mention MVS dropping that bomb pass from Patrick Mahomes. Listen, don't throw it with that much mustard. I know that there's a guy in Miami that Kansas City and Patrick Mahomes desperately misses that would help him in those situations to make it not look like an overthrow, because we have generational speed outside. But when you're dealing with an average wide receiver like Marvez Valdez-Scantling, sometimes you got to be perfect, Mahomes. And is that so much for me to ask when everyone's deeming you the greatest that they've ever seen already? Is that so much for me to ask? I don't think so, especially going up against this Eagles secondary that has not been that good all year long. So to really just wrap up what I want to say, I've been very vocal. This Kansas City offense is not the same. Jokes aside, all joking aside, without a true number one wide receiver, this is not an offense that I can trust. I understand that Travis Kelce is the quote unquote wide receiver one on the season, but he's been having his ups and downs, has been dealing with some injuries also. You saw him get banged up on a play, but of course did go back out there. He's a tough dude, no doubt. But when you have Rashee Rice, who I like as a talent, you have MVS on the outside, you have Sky Moore, Kadarius Toney, who's done minimal. Really, his greatness today was in special teams with the great punt returns that he had. He really has. I don't think that he had a punt return prior to this game also, but he was really great tonight, and that's where he shined mostly. But again, if you don't get Mahomes, a true receiver on the outside, we can't look at this offense as one that is a legitimate one, and we can't just say, oh, they have Mahomes, oh, they'll inevitably figure it out. It hasn't been the case so far. This defense for Kansas City has been amazing. They did an excellent job limiting Jalen Hurts. They did a great job of limiting essentially everything. A.J. Brown was essentially non-existent in this game. Smitty had himself a great ball game. And outside of that last drive, this really was about to be a pretty average game. And honestly, it really was an average game, not just for Patrick Mahomes, but of course for Jalen Hurts himself. You said it best when you started it. This was a battle of the mids with two great defensive performances put forth by both of these teams. All I know is we're 2 games behind the Kansas City Chiefs. You can joke, you can say whatever you want that we're not going to make the playoffs. We started 1-5. We're 5-5 now. I wear this gear with pride. Even when we were 1-5, I wear this gear with pride. But today, it's just a little bit more special having this gear on. But Mr. Dehls, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this game.
Man, you've been flying high between the Broncos wins, these Chiefs losses. Yeah, this was an ugly Kansas City Chief game. Mahomes 4 yards per attempt. Justin Watson led the way in targets and receiving yards. Rashee Rice got involved a bit, but I mean, you hit it. This receiving group is completely underwhelming. I do see some people in the comments saying we're not going to accept Rashee Rice slander. I'm with you. Rashee Rice is solid, but to expect Rashee Rice to be your wide receiver one on a Super Bowl caliber team his rookie season, you're asking a lot from him. And of course, everything changes if MVS is able to haul in that pass. Is it maybe a half step overthrown by Patrick Mahomes? Maybe. But at the end of the day, you got to make that catch. And on the other side of the ball, Jalen Hurts, far from his best game. He did save himself fantasy-wise with those 2 rushing touchdowns. But we're talking about 14 completions, 22 attempts, less than 200 total yards, took 5 sacks. He was under pressure the entire game from start to finish. No doubt. Chiefs defense was able to get after them. You mentioned the receivers. Devontae Smith's really the only one worth noting. Almost goes for 100 yards. A.J. Brown, first game, we'll talk about him in the dud section, but first game outside of the top 13 from fantasy finishes. I'm sure he'll get back on track. But I do think it's important to note how great this Eagles defense was. I know we want to talk a lot about the Chiefs and their, lack of playmakers, but I think we were expecting the Kansas City offense to come out off of the bye clicking. We were expecting Andy Reid to go into his lab, cook up some shit with Mahomes and Travis Kelce, and they come out and lay up 30 points on this Philly defense. But that wasn't the case. Philly's defense was solid for most of this game. They were a bit bend, don't break, got some turnovers at right times. But overall, you got to feel pretty confident that you just let up 17 points to Patrick Mahomes, regardless of situation. Travis Kelce was out there, right? It's not like they had nobody. They did have Travis Kelce, and we've seen them put up points with just Travis Kelce out there. So they've shown some moments, like that Miami game, for example, holding Miami and that potent offense to 17 points, now holding another potent offense to 17 points as well, that you could look at and say, you know what? There's some hope here, because you look through the NFC, there's going to be some dogs offensively. If you have to go through Detroit, Dallas has been the hottest team in football. The San Francisco 49ers, of course, are amazing offensively. So you need your defense to have some sort of fight. You can't just go out there, expect Jalen Hurts in this offense to put up 30 every week, because that's not going to get you too far in the playoffs. So I do think there has been some moments throughout the season, while overall the end of season numbers might not be great for Philadelphia, if they're able to get just a couple turnovers, a couple sacks, some pressure on the opposing quarterback like we saw in this game, I think the offense is good enough to be able to beat just about anybody. We did see that Kansas City got an extra shot at the end, but when the Eagles got the ball back with 5 minutes, I'm like, oh shit, this game's over. Right?
Facts.
Run the ball, run the ball, run the ball. They had a holding penalty, I think, on first or second down that sent them back 10 yards, and that kind of screwed up the drive. But it does feel like this is a team that if they get the ball 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter, more times than not, they're able to hold on to that, and they don't even need to put their defense back on the field. And that's something that's going to come in clutch down the line. So overall, ugly game, I think, from both offenses. Jalen Hurts just had that one drive at the end. Nice ball to Smitty. Of course, the tush push is always going to work. So happy the Eagles got the win, and the Chiefs have some stuff to figure out offensively.
Let's listen to the Chiefs' second half drives, if you don't mind. First drive in the second half, 4 plays a punt. Next drive, 3 plays a punt. Next play, they have that long drive, 12 plays that they go 65 yards, that Travis Kelce fumbles. It's supposed to be the best tight in the game. No excuses. You got to hold on to the ball. 6 plays a punt. 3 plays, minus 2 yards a punt. And the next drive after that, they turn it over on downs. It's not going to do it, guys. It's not going to do it. It's not going to do it, especially when you have the best quarterback in the game on your team. It's not going to do it when you have the best tight end on your team. It's not going to do it when you have arguably the best head coach in all of football. It's not acceptable. 0 points in the second half. You got to be better than that. I'm sorry. I have no sympathy for you guys. Everyone's claiming that you're the best team, that, hey, you have this best defense. I trust Patrick Mahomes. It's going to be situations like this that you got to get it done. I have no sympathy. You got to be better. Quite simple as that. But anyways, moving on from my high horse, Dehls, if there's not anything you want to say other than that the Chiefs blew this one, and the Eagles, of course, did their job. Hey, toughness, it's not a trait that every team has. But the Philadelphia Eagles, even in an ugly matchup, they go and they get a job done. A game that seemingly looked like it was Kansas City's Chiefs the whole way through. But they flipped scripts. In the Super Bowl, the Eagles were up 10. The Chiefs go ahead and they come back. In this situation, the Chiefs were up 10. Eagles come back and win this game. Now, of course, it wasn't that same offensive duel that we saw in the Super Bowl. But nevertheless, like you mentioned, the Eagles have faced 2 very good offenses. Very good offenses. Let me say one very good offense, one mediocre offense. I'm talking about Kansas City. And they've been able to go ahead and do a job. The pass rush is there. Jalen Carter is one of the best defensive players in football as a rookie. I already feel confident to say that he's a dominant force at the defensive tackle. But again, you got to give credit where credit is due to this Philadelphia team. They played a very resilient game, and to come away with the outcome that they did, again, credit where it's due, even where it wasn't the prettiest offensively. Now, enough of me going crazy on the Kansas City Chiefs. Let's go ahead and get into our studs and duds of week 11. I'll start us off at the quarterback position, a guy that unfortunately put me out of by contention. Mr. Brock Purdy. He goes and he finishes with over 30 fantasy points, 333 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, had that bomb touchdown to Brandon Ayuk. We say it all the time. Our league has bonuses. So when he threw that 70-something yard touchdown to Brandon Ayuk, I almost passed out. I was distraught. But again, you called it. Hey, he was one of your best plays of the week. You felt confident enough that you had Kyler Murray and Brock Purdy and Joe Burrow. And, of course, we unfortunately know how Joe Burrow's season had come to an end. But even before that, you didn't love the matchup versus the Ravens. You said, I trust Brock in this matchup going up against Tampa Bay, and he absolutely lit it up. Trevor Lawrence, he's been a guy who's been struggling. We've barely seen him crack top 10 finishes. I say barely because we saw it week 1. And now we see it this past week. He goes and throws for 262, has 2 touchdowns passing. And if I'm not mistaken, was able to rush 2 in as well. He had himself a dominating performance going up against Tennessee. We probably should have saw this one coming. Tennessee's pass defense, of course, not the greatest. We're going to talk about a stud over there at the wide receiver position on the Jaguars as well. But this was finally the dominating performance that we saw from that we've been waiting for Trevor Lawrence. Now, let me ask you, Mr. Dehls, Is this something that we can anticipate going forward?
I think he's going to be matchup dependent because
Okay.
Tennessee's done a decent job against opposing fantasy quarterbacks. To start the year, the secondary is still not good, but they've done a good job, at least in the fantasy aspect of limiting quarterbacks. But Trevor Lawrence had his way with them. I mean, we're going to talk about, like you mentioned, a stud in the wide receiver position, but Calvin Ridley being able to be alive in this offense when he is the number one receiver and making explosive plays, this is what this offense can look like. And Tennessee has definitely fallen from grace over the years of being number one seeds and being in contention. And right now they feel a bit lost because they don't really know what they're doing at quarterback. Is Will Levis the guy? Is he not? You had Vrabel have some interesting comments saying they're a better team, they're a better coach team. So they do feel a little lost right now. But this is a great win for the Jaguars. A great performance for Trevor Lawrence. He needed it.
Justin Herbert, another week where his team loses. He goes and he has himself a solid ball game. 260 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns. Finishes with 26 fantasy points on the week. Your quarterback 3. An unfortunate situation for Herbert. He continues to ball out, and his team just can't get it done for him. We saw last week with Detroit where they go and they put up 38 points and they lose. And this week, going up against Green Bay, 20 points, not the greatest, but of course, if you watch the game, you know that his receivers left some points on the field. Keenan Allen had a few drops that we hardly ever see from Keenan. And of course, Quinn Johnston dropping what should have been the game-winning touchdown. Justin Herbert camps
points on the board probably. Keenan had one gimme touchdown, the other one make one guy miss and he's in, and Quinn Johnston, if he catches that in stride, that's in the end zone.
Yeah, the gimme touchdown hit him right in the chest. That's inexcusable. Yeah. You're Keenan Allen, you got to grab that. Quinn Johnston, it is in stride, bro. You got to grab that ball. There's no excuse to that one. That should have been a game winner. And of course, we could be talking about Justin Herbert as a quarterback 1 if they do score that. Lamar Jackson, we talked about him on Thursday night. He goes and he finishes as a top 5 fantasy quarterback. Josh Allen, one of the first quarterbacks that we've seen go ahead and ball out against this New York Jets defense. I mean, he's seemingly matchup proof. We did see a week 1 where he, of course, was limited in such the fashion that he was against the New York Jets, but 275, 3 passing touchdowns, did have the interception. But again, that was on some Mickey Mouse, just chuck it up. They caught it at the end of the half, but it keeps the streak alive for consecutive weeks in a row where he threw an interception. It's whatever. This one I'm counting as he didn't throw an INT. Stats will tell you otherwise. Kyler Murray, your guy, start of the week, top 6 finish, 214 passing yards, 1 touchdown, did have an INT, but where he made his impact felt on the ground, had 51 rushing on 7 attempts, did have a rushing touchdown as well. I'm thinking Kyler Murray's back. I'm thinking that as long as he's healthy on the field, I start him very confidently, even in one quarterback leagues.
And that rushing touchdown was amazing too, because when I'm watching this, of course, I'm rooting my ass off for Kyler because I'm starting him against you. I'm thinking there's no way in hell he's getting this, right? It's a read option play, or maybe it's just a quarterback run design, but it looks like a read option. He has 2 defenders basically right in his face in the backfield, somehow makes both of them miss, is able to get to the outside. And just before that, he had a run that went down to like the 1 or 2 yard line where it felt like if he just would have stretched out and dove, he could have got in. Instead, he kind of protected himself and went out of bounds. But yeah, Kyler Murray, we talked about the explosiveness, had a big bomb touchdown that first drive to Rondale Moore. Did miss Hollywood a couple of times as well. There was one play where, I mean, honestly, I just don't know if he has the arm strength where he's all the way to the left. Hollywood has a step on his defender on the right side of the field, but I mean, you got to throw that across the field, 50, 60 yards down, gets intercepted by Derek Stingley. But it did feel like even though this is a great game for Kyler, he even left a couple plays on the field. Just shows the upside he has.
And then, to nobody's surprise at all, Tommy DeVito enters the top 10 of the week, finishes with 23 fantasy points, throws for 246, 3 touchdowns against the Washington Commanders. Now, let's give props to Tommy DeVito, of course, New Jersey kid, goes and has himself a ball game. But this more so tells me about the Washington Commanders defense that we've already known about. This is one of the worst secondaries in the league, and they allowed a backup quarterback to go ahead and do this to them. Credit to the kid. End of the day, you got to go out there and execute. But again, Washington Commanders secondary, Washington Commanders defense as a whole is not good. They got 9 sacks on DeVito, and it didn't matter because guys are seemingly wide open, and he's able to just hit the wide open guy and allow them to make a play. If your quarterback is going up against the Commanders, feel as confident as ever that they're going to go ahead and dog. My start of the week, Justin Fields back into the top 10. This is what he does. They lost a heartbreaker. He throws for 169 and a touchdown, but on the ground, rushes for over 100 yards, gets 104 rush yards on 18 attempts. He's back, and he's going to do this every single week so long as he's in the lineup. He's a force. This was the first game that we saw him dominant on the ground all season long, too. So I think that this is a great sign for things to come. Maybe that also goes hand in hand with the thumb injury, that he wasn't trying to throw as much. He did have a play where he overthrew DJ Moore that would have been a nice touchdown. Ironically enough, later in the game, he had another situation where he hit DJ Moore right in stride for a touchdown. I think that this was a solid performance for him. I anticipated that he would be a little bit better throwing the football against this Detroit Lions secondary that has really struggled so far this season. But I think a great comeback game for Justin Fields. And I think going forward, you should have no worries that he's going to be startable.
Absolutely. Is my mic sounding better now?
Yeah, you sound good. I think it was just the way that it was turned.
Yeah, I think it's just the way it turns. It's weird. But moving on to quarterback duds, I'll be honest, there's like two on this list. You know, Matt Stafford, bit of a disappointment this week, 190 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. Just barely missed Cooper Kupp, which would have been a 30, 40-yard touchdown, and he probably wouldn't be in this section, but doesn't always end up like that, so he ends up in the dud section. The other one's Baker Mayfield, QB 20, 246, a touchdown, interception. Yeah, not great. I mean, you know, you're not absolutely destroyed with QB 20, but if you're looking at names that are in the dud section, those are really the only two that stuck out. I think the only other one is Dak fell from, you know, being the best quarterback in football down to QB 15, less than 200 passing yards, got a couple of touchdowns, but overall quarterbacks performed this week. So if you had a stud quarterback and you started him, he probably performed, because outside of Stafford and Baker, and again, these aren't absolutely destroying you type weeks, everyone else pretty much performed.
I was going to say just outside the top 10, we had Hurts. We had Tua. Sam Howell, who's been a fantasy dream this week, struggled against the Giants, but still was able to salvage, was a top 10 performer this week. Also, you mentioned it. I mean, quarterbacks played well. I didn't love that matchup with Baker against San Fran. There's a reason why he was my sit of the week, but even still, I mean, again, the quarterback position was awesome this week. Moving on to our fantasy running back studs of the week. Running back 1. Saquon Barkley destroyed the Commanders, 57 receiving yards. We had him on the ground for 83 rushing yards. Also goes ahead and has 2 receiving touchdowns. The thing that kind of upsets me with Saquon and his receiving work is, as a rookie, we saw him dominate at such a high level in the passing game. And that was because you had Eli Manning and he was a check down king, and Saquon Barkley was the recipient of that. But you knew, and we've known, that he has the capabilities to be a great pass catcher. It always kind of boggled my mind that they weren't utilizing him more in that fashion. But again, finishes as running back 1, 30 fantasy points this week. Just an amazing matchup. Next on this list, running back 2. And I think that I got to start putting more respect on this guy's name. I've had him on my roster all season long. I've started him once. I'm talking about Jaylen Warren, who finishes as RB2 this week. In the last 3 weeks, we've seen him finish RB15, RB8, and RB2. This comes right after they say Jaylen Warren is our starting back. But the snap percentages could say otherwise. He only played 45% of snaps, 9 carries, and was able to become your RB2 on the week. Did have that 75-yard touchdown. He is electric. And the matchup next week, going up against Cincinnati, week after that, Arizona. We might be talking about a playoff dream, or in your guys' leagues that your playoff matchups are 15, 16, 17. If you need a playoff push, this could be your guy right here. Cincinnati, Arizona, New England, Indianapolis, Cincinnati again, week 16, and Seattle to close it out week 17. Jaylen Warren could be a league winner. I'm not just saying that lightly. He's electric, and he's explosive.
What's the most annoying thing is he had that 75-yard touchdown and didn't get another touch, or at least another carry, that is. Maybe he got a reception. But he has this huge breakaway run, and the Steelers said, nah, since we just have so many options on offense, since we move the ball so well offensively, why do we need to give the ball to Jaylen Warren? We're going to talk about that other running back in the dud section because they keep giving him the ball. He doesn't do much with it. But Jaylen Warren is phenomenal. It is weird that he gets the starter nod and the snap percentage is still the same. Who knows? Mike Tomlin saying, oh, he was a starter. Maybe, I don't even know if he was out there for the first snap because that's technically the starter of the game. But a bit surprised that we saw the snap percentages basically stay the same over this last month or so.
Jahmyr Gibbs, RB3 on the week. I mean, ever since we said it's time, unleash Jahmyr Gibbs. Yep. This is his time to shine. RB3, RB1, RB2, and RB3. This is what everyone was anticipating.
Just need to be a little bit patient that first month or so, right? This is something to remember for next year too. There's not going to be a running back the pedigree of Gibbs or Bijan.
Trayvon Henderson. You're not a Trayvon Henderson guy?
Henderson, but I don't know if he's going to be a first-round pick. It's just something to remember that running backs typically, while there's some that get off the bat right away and go crazy, there could be times that it might take a month, it might take 2 months, but when that rookie running back has a chance to have a starting type role on a team, this is the type of production they could put up year one. You were probably able to go and trade for Gibbs before the David Montgomery injury. You probably could have traded like Terry McLaurin for him. You probably could have traded like a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, because that Gibbs owner's like, bro, like I've had this guy for 4 or 5 weeks. I kind of know what the splits are going to be with David Montgomery. I know he's never going to get the most touches on the team, but it goes to show you talent always prevails. Jahmyr Gibbs was always way too talented for him to play 20, 30, 40% of snaps. He's going to be able to get on the field more often. It sucks that it took a David Montgomery injury for the Lions coaching staff to kind of been like, oh, this guy's really good. But overall, something to remember for next year when we talk about rookie running backs.
And the funny...
Uh-oh.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we're here.
All right. And the funny thing about it is that his usage has been so up and down, I guess you could say, in the last 2 weeks where we've seen Montgomery back on the field. 14 carries, 8 carries this week, 36 yards, but did get into the end zone. Where he's really made his impact has been through the receiving work. 5 targets with Montgomery, 6 targets with Montgomery. This week, he has 6 catches, brings in all 6 of his targets for 59 yards. Jahmyr is being featured in the way that we anticipated, through the receiving game. And of course, he gets his touches here and there on the ground. He's going to be effective. He's going to be efficient. And as long as they continue to use him in this way, he's going to continue to be a fantasy dream. CMC, another day, another week where he is in the top 5. He's unbelievable. Gus Edwards, we talked about him on Thursday. He goes and he finishes as a top 5 guy again. Joe Mixon, he had himself a solid game against the Ravens. Brian Robinson and Devin Singletary, who would you rather rest the season? We're talking about the running back 7 on the week in Robinson and Devin Singletary, running back 8 on the week. Now, I asked this question because Brian Robinson, he seems to have the more carved out role with the Washington Commanders. He has very quietly been the running back 4 on the year. Now, he hasn't had his bye week, which also could play a very large role in that, where we see Sam Howell being one of the league leaders in yards. That also could be why. But he has been pretty awesome fantasy-wise. Running back 7 this past week, running back 1 last week, and really, he's been a model consistency of RB2, 18, 25, 27, 17, 29. Early in the season, he was really good, 15. We saw him finish as running back 1 in that game versus the Broncos early on in the year. Is he someone that you feel more comfortable with, or a Devin Singletary, who in back-to-back weeks has finished in the top 10 as well? We're talking about a guy who's gotten over 20 carries 2 weeks in a row, over 100 rushing yards 2 weeks in a row, has gotten to the end zone 2 weeks in a row, a snap percentage of over 80 2 weeks in a row. Is this the answer for the Houston Texans at running back? Or would you rather a guy who's been kind of consistent all season long in a Brian Robinson?
I think it's whoever the other running back who's injured, because you have Dameon Pierce injured, you have Antonio Gibson injured. So whichever player is going to be out longer, it feels like that other running back is going to have the most value, because Brian Robinson did do this a couple weeks ago with Antonio Gibson, but he missed this past week and we saw him. He was always around like 50-ish, 55, 60% of snaps. Antonio Gibson was out this past week. He was up to 78%. So that shows the role that Antonio Gibson has mostly as a pass catcher. But what Devin Singletary is doing right now without Dameon Pierce on the field, you mentioned back-to-back weeks of 80+% snap percentage. That's something that is rarely achieved across all NFL teams. He has a true workhorse role, and it might sound silly, but he's basically been saved all season long. Like, he hasn't been out there. He hasn't been the
So true.
primary ball carrier where he's taken all of these hits. He has all these miles on his legs. Even when he was in Buffalo, he was always splitting time. And I always thought he was solid in Buffalo. Dameon Pierce, it looks like, has lost his job. I think I slightly lead Singletary. I love this offense. I love how easy it is for the Texans to go up and down the field. And listen, to the Commanders' credit, they could do it as well. But I just love the guaranteed workload that I'm getting for Singletary. Once Pierce gets back, it's a bit of an unknown. But I do feel like once Gibson gets back, we kind of know what the roles are for both players. I feel like Singletary, if they just phase out Pierce, which is possible, how great Singletary has looked, could be a top 12 type running back rest of the season.
Over 5 a carry in these last 2 games. He's been uberly efficient.
He passes the eye test too. He's breaking tackles. He looks explosive.
I think without Dameon Pierce, it's got to be comfortable Devin Singletary. And I never thought in my lifetime I would say that. But these last 2 weeks, you focus so much on CJ Stroud because he's so electric. He has one of the best arms in the game already as a rookie, that you forget that Devin Singletary can do a job and is a pro's pro. He's been doing it for some time now. He leaves Buffalo. He comes to Houston in this situation. We're anticipating that Dameon Pierce is the guy. But just like last year, where we saw James Cook have his opportunities vultured by a Devin Singletary, here we are now in Devin Singletary. It's not that he's vulturing them. He's just the better running back right now. And it's showing in the numbers, and it's showing with our eyes. You're right. It passes the eye test. We talk about James Cook. He goes and he finishes as a top 10 running back against the New York Jets. New York Jets just had a bad day defensively against the Buffalo Bills. They were able to just do a job. And DeAndre Swift, who has been the model of consistency this year, getting in the end zone, he goes and is a top 10 guy. Just finishing out the top 10, Breece Hall at running back 11. We get Tony Pollard finally having himself a great game, has 18 fantasy points. That's a fact. Going up against Carolina, that'll do it to you. Rachaad White continues to be a dog, one of the safest running backs that there are right now, going up against San Francisco, still able to put up almost 20 fantasy points. It's the receiving work. He's going to get passed to a ton. 7 targets this week, 6 catches. You just look at it. The lowest amount of targets that he's seen since his bye week has been, 3 last week, but that was a matchup where he still was a top 11 guy in fantasy football. He's going to be a consistent workhorse for this Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense. I love Rachaad White. He was one of my guys coming out of college. It was just one of those. He wasn't a great rusher, and they weren't using him in the passing game as much as they should have. They've completely realized that this is how they need to unleash him, and it has been showing in the numbers.
Absolutely. When you get those running back who receive cheat codes like Danny Woodhead, who was, top 5, top 6 running back one year, Rachaad White's a bit more than Woodhead, but just goes to show if you get passing work, that's all you need to be fantasy relevant. Moving on to the running back duds. So there's 3 running backs here that all got banged up early in the game. They count as duds, but obviously got injured. Devon Achane, Kenneth Walker, Aaron Jones. I think I'm least worried about Achane. Mike McDaniel had a very Mike McDaniel-esque response saying, I wouldn't rule him in, but I wouldn't rule him out. But it sounds like it's not serious. Did re-aggravate the injury that caused him to go on IR. But I do think I read a report that said it was precautionary that they even held him out at all. So it does feel like this isn't a long-term injury. Aaron Jones and Kenneth Walker, on the other hand, do feel like potential multi-week injuries. Aaron Jones, it felt like when you saw him on the field get carted off that he might have tore his ACL. He walks off on his own, gets carted to the locker room, has a towel over his head. But thankfully, it seems like he was able to avoid a serious injury, but still likely to miss a couple of weeks. And same thing with Kenneth Walker with that oblique injury. Zach Charbonnet becomes very interesting. The schedule is disgusting. The schedule is brutal for Zach Charbonnet, but he's a starting running back who's probably going to get 70+% of snaps. He's probably rostered regardless. It's not like someone you're going to get on your waiver wire. I'm assuming he is available. But I think I would still start him just because of the landscape of running backs. You probably have to. He was a second-round pick, highly touted, can pass protect, can catch the ball, can run the ball, can do a little bit of everything. Just doesn't really have that home run hitting ability like Kenneth Walker does. Sure. But out of these 3 running backs, I think Achane, I'm assuming you feel the same way that you feel fine about. But Kenneth Walker and Aaron Jones, who both of these guys have been dealing with injuries off and on. How do you feel rest of the season about them?
Kenneth Walker, it's unfortunate. Of course, he's been having himself an awesome season. But even prior to this injury, the concern was there with the schedule. On top of it, we've seen Zach Charbonnet lean into his usage, where we haven't seen him play consistent 50% of snaps since Zach Charbonnet wasn't on the field. And that's because they want to be that dual type back situation. One's more of a pass catcher. Zach Charbonnet also is just a bruising type guy. He's a very strong back. But Ken Walker in his own right, he's a strong guy as well. He's fast in between the tackles, fast outside the tackles as well. It's a situation where they drafted Charbonnet in the second round. You had that inclination that he was going to hinder Walker's usage at some point of the season. But down the stretch, I had someone in our league send me Ken Walker for Derrick Henry. That's how much he didn't like his matchups going forward. Of course, the injury makes you feel different. You don't know how to feel on a consistent basis, where we have to see what comes out end of the day with his injury. But Zach Charbonnet, you're right. He becomes very, very intriguing if Ken Walker is going to miss some time. So in this situation, I think I'm making Zach Charbonnet a priority for me. If I'm on the waiver wire, we're going to talk about that later. If he's not already owned in your league, go ahead and do yourself a favor and pick up Zach Charbonnet. A Shane, I feel fine with, no doubt about it. In this Miami offense, he's going to get his. There's just so many mouths to feed. And in this game where the offense really wasn't clicking on all cylinders, Raiders have been sneaky good defensively these last few weeks as well. I think that with the injury, he's kind of been on it. He was on and off the field a little bit. I think that they wanted to play it rather safe than sorry. They didn't need him this much in this game. And the last name you mentioned was Aaron Jones. It's unfortunate that he's been dealing with these injuries all season long. But again, I think I'd rather play it safe and put somebody else in his position. If you're fortunate enough to have a Jaylen Warren on your team, of course, that's an amazing substitution there. But maybe a guy like Ty Chandler, who we saw play very well against the Denver Broncos, had that big run on that punt, on that fake punt that on fourth down that put them in solid field position. But he had himself a solid game, pass catching, running as well. I think that with Madison fumbling, it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility to see him get some work. So I'm just throwing out some options for you if you guys are in this unfortunate situation that you could pivot to these guys.
Moving on to a couple other duds. Najee Harris, RB40 on the week. We talked about it before. He still saw a majority of snaps over Jaylen Warren. 12 carries for 35 yards. So didn't do much with it. Had a touchdown in 3 of the previous 4 weeks. But when he's not scoring a touchdown, this is what it's going to look like, because he doesn't have that ability to break a 75-yard touchdown like we saw from Jaylen Warren. And the passing attack in this offense is just so broken that you can't really rely on that aspect of the offense. Derrick Henry, running back 38 on the week, 10 carries for 38 yards. This is a really weird game for the Titans. They got blown out. They only ran 38 offensive plays. For context, today's game, Eagles-Chiefs. Eagles ran 54 plays. The Chiefs ran 74 plays. So this was a insanely low amount of offensive plays. They held the ball for only 23 minutes. Carolina and Indy are coming up these next 2 weeks. So I think these next 2 weeks we will be talking about Derrick Henry in the stud section. But this game where they were getting blown out basically from the jump, didn't really have a chance, and were almost 3 and out or turnover basically every drive, never had a chance to get anything going. Moving on to Josh Jacobs, 14 carries for 39 yards. I was a bit surprised the Raiders didn't run the ball more. This was a close game the entire way. And the first quarter, halftime, third quarter, Miami ended up winning by 7 points. This was a game that the Raiders could have established the run more, but Aiden O'Connell threw the ball 41 times. And because of that, Josh Jacobs wasn't able to get the same type of opportunity. And to be fair, the opportunity he did get, 14 carries, 39 yards, talked about 3 yards a carry. It's not like he did much with it. But to the Dolphins' credit, they've been a pretty decent rush defense. They're allowing on average 84 rushing yards per game. I do feel like some of that is game script, where the Dolphins can just score so much so quickly that you feel like I feel like the Raiders felt like this, where even though the Dolphins for majority of the game were under 20 points, they felt like we got to score, because we know on the other end they could score in just one touchdown in one play. But overall, they've been great defensively on the ground. Austin Eckler, RB30 on the week, 10 carries for 64 yards, nothing through the air, only 2 catches for 6. that ankle looks like it's still bothering him. I know that clip is going kind of viral about him, running in quicksand or whatever people are saying. It was weird because he's coming off 3 straight weeks of being a top 6 running back. And I felt like when I was watching these last 3 weeks, the ankle maybe hindered him a bit, but this was obvious. Like, he got out to the outside and he did not look like Austin Eckler. This looked like a Najee Harris type run where he was not able to get any type of speed, ended up getting caught from behind. Is this something that you're just, I don't want to say throwing away, but you have real concern about his ankle going forward?
He didn't look good. It definitely was one of those that the eye caught and just, it's like light bulb goes on in your head. This isn't the Austin Eckler that we know. We understand when he's on the field, he's one of the most dominant fantasy running backs. Forget about fantasy. Throw that away for a second. He's one of the most dominant running backs that there is. And for that to be the case and for him to look that way, you just know that something's off. That's not the Austin Eckler that we've been used to. I'm definitely interested to see how he comes back next week. Definitely something I'm keeping my eye on. It's unfortunate, too, because I'm in a dynasty league. I'm trying to go back-to-back, made a power move, acquired Austin Eckler, and in the second game on my team, this is the result. But, of course, we anticipate that he's going to be all right. He's been great for the Chargers so long he's been on the field. Has been solid this season when he's been on the field. This was just one of those that kind of stood out to you. But definitely keeping it in mind moving forward.
The last name I want to mention is Travis Etienne. Now, he wasn't like RB40 or anything like that, but it's interesting to see that off of the bye week, back-to-back weeks outside the top 20, his snap percentage has dropped from about mid-80s to about mid-60s. And not Tank Bigsby, but Dearness Johnson is now seeing kind of that backup running back role, and he's getting involved more. Now, was this just these last 2 games are getting blown out, right? They blew out who they played, the Titans this past week. The week before that, they got blown out by the 49ers. So are we looking at this kind of just game script? It was weird for Etienne. Dearness Johnson was on the field because it was out of reach. Or do you have any concerns about maybe he's not this top 5 type running back that we saw the first 2 months of the season?
2 games in a row, not ideal. But again, you mentioned game script, and that's exactly what I'm going to allude to. We've seen him dominate snap percentages. I mean, we're talking about over 80% in every game outside of these last 2, but 2, and that was week 2 versus Kansas City and week 3 versus Houston. Versus Houston, they were getting blown out. In Kansas City, that's just a really good defense, and they showed that very early on. These last 2 weeks, 61%, 66%. I think that he'll have better days to come going up against Houston next week. It'll be a division game. I don't anticipate that it'll go like the first time around. I think that Jacksonville's offense will play better. And then going up against Cincinnati, who has not been a very good rush defense whatsoever, I anticipate that he gets back on track. I'm not going to look into these 2 games all too much.
Yep, I think I agree. It's just coming out of the bye is always interesting because you have those meetings, you have those talks within offensive coordinators, offensive position groups saying, what could we change out of the bye? But again, these last 2 weeks, just big blowouts. I think we'll just chalk it up to that.
I'm with you there, brother. Now let's move on to our wide receiver studs. A guy that we ruled out, a guy that we were done with. At the wide receiver 1 this week, Calvin Ridley, just like we all wrote it up. Going up against Tennessee, again, we probably should have saw this coming. Tennessee secondary, not that good. But again, we've been kind of plagued with watching Calvin Ridley, the highs, the lows, mostly the lows, very inconsistent in this offense. Talent has always been there, but the concern was a consistency. That's what it's always been with the Calvin Ridley and the Jacksonville Jaguars. Finally put it all together. 103 yards, gets into the end zone twice, 7 receptions. It was just a force feeding to Calvin Ridley against Tennessee. Finishes with 31 fantasy points. Going forward, the schedule is Houston, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Baltimore, Tampa Bay, and to wrap up the season for fantasy football, Carolina. Now, I don't know about you, but I still need to see this one more week to feel good. I think that he can have himself a solid ball game versus Houston, but going up against Cincinnati, where now that needs to be the crux of the Cincinnati Bengals team without a Joe Burrow. Cleveland, who's been awesome defensively, just limited Pittsburgh, although that's not impossible. Deontay Johnson, who's been very good. George Pickens, who had a great ball game the first time they match up, just got clamped up this past week. Neither of them did a damn thing. And then Baltimore, who's been one of the best defenses in the league. Tampa Bay, very good matchup for him. But then Carolina, who's been sneaky good versus wide receivers this season. I'm still waiting. I think Calvin Ridley, we know he has the talent. If you have to start him at flex, I can live with that. But as wide receiver 2, wide receiver 1, I still need to see it another week or two before I can be all in.
It's the splits with and without Zay Jones, right? It's 4 weeks when Zay Jones plays.
Shout out to Brett. Brett called that out too when we had him on the podcast.
He did. It's 4 weeks Zay Jones has played. 3 of those weeks, Calvin Ridley has been wide receiver 6, wide receiver 9, and this past week, wide receiver 1 in the week. He did play in week 2 against Kansas City where he did nothing, but the entire offense did nothing. So what can you really do there? I don't really know what to chalk it up to, whether it's coverages, whether it's alignment, but it's pretty obvious right now. If Zay Jones is playing, Calvin Ridley is probably startable. And this upcoming week against Houston, I'm with you. I don't want to need to start him where, damn, man, he's my wide receiver 2. I'm relying on him week in and week out. But as a wide receiver 3, if you play with 2 flexes, a wide receiver 4, where he could give you this upside of being a top 10 receiver, but you do know what the floor is. With that being said, these positive matchups like Houston, I'm all for. When he has negative matchups like Cleveland and Baltimore, I'm probably staying away.
All right. Tyreek Hill, wide receiver 2, another week where he's just one of the greatest that we've ever seen. Wide receiver 3, Tank Dell. He has been awesome these last 3 weeks, combining for over 300 yards in the last 3 weeks. The targets have been crazy. 11, 14, and 10 the last 3 games. 114 yards, 149 yards this past week. Has gotten to the end zone 4 times in the last 3 games. In that time period has been wide receiver 1, wide receiver 12, and wide receiver 3 this past weekend. Is this a wide receiver 1?
It might be. I know when we were talking starts and sits on Thursday, I said we're going to have that conversation about Tank Dell being the potential wide receiver 1 on this team. And I think more than anything, it's the kind of size of him, like the literal size where you don't believe in this guy who's like 5'9", 170 pounds that he can be a wide receiver 1. But he's so explosive. And him and CJ Stroud, I mean, that touchdown to the back right corner of the end zone was just, it was beautiful. They had the non-verbal communication between the two where CJ Stroud broke to the right. Tank Dell saw it, also broke up into the right, and he just gave him an absolute dot. But yeah, this offense, how explosive it is. Start Tank Dell, start Nico Collins, start Dalton Schultz, start Devin Singletary. CJ Stroud is just on such a banger right now that all of these guys are going to be valuable down the stretch.
Week 4, wide receiver 4, Keenan Allen, another week where he's just one of the better ones in the game. Brandon Ayuk gets himself back into – talk to me.
I said Keenan probably should have 2 more touchdowns too.
Keenan could have easily finished as wide receiver 1 this week if he had some hands on him, which we know that he does. So it was shocking to see him struggle the way that he did in the first half. But again, football, tale of 2 halves. I think he had 15 yards in the first half. In the second half, had 95 and was able to get into the end zone. That's the Keenan Allen that he's shown us to be. We keep talking about it. He's having a career year past the age of 30. You don't really see that. And it's been awesome to see him really be and solidify himself as one of the league's best. Brandon Ayuk gets himself back into the top 5. With Deebo Samuel, it seems as if he is a comfortable start in your lineup. 2 weeks back with Deebo, 2 weeks getting into the end zone. Brandon Ayuk had himself an unbelievable game, 156 yards, and had that long 75 yards, 76-yard touchdown. That this guy has been special this season. The numbers as of late may not show it, but again, you just watch the game and his separation ability, his quickness, his agility, how shifty he is. Brandon Ayuk is one of them guys. DJ Moore, my start of the week, top 6 guy this week with Justin Fields. He's one of the best wide receivers in fantasy football. It's that final. With Justin Fields, we've seen him finish as high as wide receiver 2, where he had 230 yards, had the 3 touchdowns.
But again, that week
he was wide receiver 2. Why is that? Jamar Chase, over 200 yards.
The Arizona game.
Had like 15 something catches that he goes and he puts up the 7-11 post. But again, double-digit fantasy points with Justin Fields all weeks but week 1. We've seen him kind of struggle these last few weeks, but right back with over 20 fantasy points with Justin Fields in the lineup. I love DJ Moore going forward. The matchups are pretty solid. Goes up against Minnesota next week. Secondary wise have been pretty lenient. Does have a bye, which kind of sucks. But then Detroit, Cleveland, who's been really good. But I think that with Justin Fields, I think that they can overcome that matchup. Arizona, you love that. And then Atlanta, who has not been the best defense as of late. I really love DJ Moore rest of the season, as you guys should with Justin Fields at quarterback. Amon-Ra, he's one of them ones, one of my favorite guys in the game. Devontae Adams finds himself back into the top 10. Had himself a bomb touchdown, 82 yards on the game, receiving touchdown. I don't know if I'm back in on him yet, though. Last 2 weeks has had double-digit fantasy points in both, 14.6 and 20. Yep. 21.2 and 13 targets in back-to-back weeks. Are you in? Are you back in, I should say, on Devontae Adams rest of the season?
If he's going to be getting 10 plus targets a game, it's hard not to be. You just think that the talent's going to pay out. And over time, I think you're expecting Aiden O'Connell to get a bit more comfortable in the offense. It doesn't look like O'Connell is going to be any sort of franchise quarterback, but can he be a game manager, high level backup type guy? Probably. And if he's that, Devontae Adams has shown that he can make it work. Even with Jimmy or Derek Carr from last year, who is far from this top 10 type quarterback as we've seen this year in New Orleans. So yeah, Devontae Adams, I don't think he should be out of your lineup by any means.
Rest of season schedule is interesting. Does have Kansas City next week. Does have the bye week 13. Then has Minnesota and the Chargers back to back. I love those matchups for Devontae. Then has Kansas City again. Not ideal, especially in playoff time. And then Indianapolis to wrap up the year. That's a good matchup for sure. Yeah. I think it's those 2 games versus Kansas City that if you have to start Devontae, you start him. Of course, it's very hard to take him out of your lineup. Almost impossible, I would say. But Kansas City has been so great, especially you look at the wide receiver ones they face. Look at tonight where A.J. Brown was essentially a non-factor in this game. Kansas City Chiefs can do that to teams. So I just would keep that in mind, especially with Aiden O'Connell at the quarterback position. Wrapping up this top 10, we have DK Metcalf as a top 10 guy. That's huge to see. We've seen him in back-to-back weeks, put up very good fantasy performances. And then Khalil Shakir, I want to talk about him relatively briefly. I think he is one of those guys that we're going to be talking about at the end of the show when it comes to waiver wire pickups. Wide receiver 9 this week, had 115 yards, 4 targets, 3 catches. A lot of his production did come on that big touchdown that Josh Allen fit in a window that I couldn't even tell you how he got that ball to Shakir. Yeah. But he was able to do the rest and get into the end zone. And in the last 3 of 4 weeks, we've seen him get to double digits, 20 fantasy points, 10 fantasy points, 15 fantasy points against Denver. Denver just shut down the Bills defense pretty much entirely outside of a Dalton Kincaid, who had himself a great ball game. But I think Khalil Shakir is one of those guys that you can get for relatively cheap fab-wise, and he could be a flex play for you if you're really in need.
Yeah, we're seeing once Dawson Knox went down that they're not running those 2 tight end personnels, and because of that, they have more receivers on the field, and Shakir has been the biggest beneficiary. Since Tampa Bay, before Tampa Bay, I should say, he was playing about 25, 30, 35% of snaps. Tampa Bay game on 65%, 71%, 76%, 74%. He does feel a bit big play dependent. He did have that game against Tampa Bay where he went 6 for 92. But this Jets game, you can't take away big plays, right? That's not how fantasy football works. But outside of that huge touchdown that he had, beating Sauce, where Sauce goes for the interception, Josh Allen makes a tremendous throw. He didn't do a ton outside of that, but Shakir was someone that last season who 5th round pick, I remember correctly. Everyone, you're either all in on Gabe Davis or all out on Gabe Davis, at least last season. I think now everyone kind of realizes what Gabe Davis is. There was some hype around Shakir last year. Didn't really do anything with it. He was completely irrelevant for fantasy and for real life for the most part. But this is a guy that obviously has some talent. He has some explosiveness. Just once Dawson Knox gets back, how is this offense going to look? I think that's the biggest question for Shakir, as well as Dalton Kincaid, not a record-breaking week by any means, but to go up against a Jets defense and still put up a pretty solid week was impressive. But that's going to be a big question mark for this Bills team because the offense is probably going to change when Knox is back.
I'm with you. Let's move on to our wide receiver duds, brother.
So you mentioned it. A.J. Brown, 1 reception. This guy was completely non-existent today. First time outside the top 13 receivers since week 2. I don't think either of us cares. He'll get back on track. Just an ugly game. Cooper Kupp had a low ankle sprain. He got out earlier in this game, but he does have a chance to play next week. He obviously had the injury, the hammy early on in the year, came back, had 1 or 2 really big weeks, and then this last month has been very disappointing. He hasn't even cracked the top 20 wide receivers, not even close, honestly. And then he comes back after the bye. We're expecting some things, but if he does play, you start him. If he doesn't play, that's gonna be a boost for Puka. Moving on to Stephon Diggs, who feels like he's in a bit of a slump right now. The offensive coordinator change going to Brady didn't change much either. 8 targets, but only 4 receptions for 27 yards. Did have a tough matchup going up against the New York Jets. We know they have, some of the best corners in the NFL. And outside of that Shakir big play, it's not like anyone really did much. Dalton Kincaid had around 50 yards, but no receivers did really much of anything. So I think more than anything, this is just a tough matchup. And this was a game where you're going up against the Jets. You don't need to do much, right? Once you score 17 points, game is damn near over. So they go up big early, don't have to throw a ton. He gets Philly next week, should bounce back. Garrett Wilson, wide receiver, 101 on the week. 8 targets, that's good. 2 receptions for 9 yards is not good. Does have Tim
don't forget that.
And a fumble. He low-key has a fumbling problem. Very low-key. He likes to get a little shifty when he has the ball after the catch. It can let that ball out, gets knocked out. Tim Boyle is now the starting quarterback. I don't know if that's better or worse. Zach Wilson's bad, but Tim Boyle is also bad. Gets Miami next week with Jalen Ramsey and Xavier Howard. I know they let up big plays to Devontae Adams, but that's Devontae Adams and a competent offense. Not excited for Garrett Wilson. Deontay Johnson was your sit of the week. He was not good. Got 8 targets, but only 2 receptions for 16 yards. He had a bit of a moment on the sideline as well, yelling at some coaches or teammates. The Steelers' passing attack is brutal. It's ugly. In a plus matchup, if he does have a positive matchup, he's probably startable as a flex play. But when you're going up against Cleveland or if they play Baltimore, this is not someone I'm excited to start. Hollywood was someone I was very excited for this week. Beautiful, beautiful matchup against Houston. He was a dud. I mentioned it earlier in the show. He did have a play or two here or there where he had a corner beat. Kyler wasn't able to connect with him. But overall, he has to prove me wrong. I'm not starting him. I'm sure he'll go crazy next week now that he'll be on my bench. But right now, he's just been too disappointing week in and week out. Then a couple other names who were outside the top 36. Christian Kirk, game script, again, didn't kill you, but you're up big. Doesn't really matter. George Pickens, again, the wide receivers, the passing game for Pittsburgh is ugly. Jordan Addison, Denver's defense has been a lot better. We talk about PS2 as well. And Amari Cooper, who was my set of the week. And, DTR was better than his performance in, week 3 or 4. But it's going to be hard for him to make these players fantasy relevant. David Njoku did get 15 targets, which was insane. But I think he turned that into like 40 or 50 yards.
Yeah.
This is going to be a team that's going to rely heavily on their defense, going to rely on the run game with Jerome Ford and Kareem Hunt. But the passing attack with Amari Cooper, Elijah Moore and company is not going to be pretty.
Listen, credit to the Cleveland Browns for able to get a dub with the backup quarterback. DTR was able to do a job. Whether it was a pretty one or an ugly one, doesn't matter. End of the day, you're getting paid to win ball games, and that's exactly what he did. Let's move on to our tight end studs of the week. George Kittle, wide receiver 1. He's been pretty damn great so far this season. He's been a top 3 fantasy tight end the last couple of weeks. Tight end 1, tight end 3, tight end 2. We're talking about 23 fantasy points, 20 fantasy points, 22 fantasy points. George Kittle, this is my guy. He's my guy because he was one of the main reasons I was able to win one of my dynasty leagues last season. And this year, he's been pretty awesome. Has been up and down, but these last few weeks, he's been a model of consistency. Shout out to George Kittle for sure. Tight end 2, Travis Kelce. May not be pretty, but he's able to still be one of the most dominant fantasy tight ends.
Such a terrible week for him. He's like, oh, tight end 2.
Yeah, it's funny because before this show started, we're saying, yo, Travis Kelce, he's regressed. What do we think? He just hasn't looked the best. But of course, he's just going to produce because that's what he does. Gets into the end zone, had 44 receiving yards, did have 7 catches. So he, of course, is going to finish as a top 2 guy this week. Josh Oliver, tight end out of Minnesota. He was able to find the end zone. Did have 47 yards and 4 receptions. I'm not going to think too much about this one. I think that's more so because Denver struggles with guarding tight ends. I think that's what it needs to be going forward, that you watch a tight end matchup going up against us and our defense. We anticipated this to be a TJ Hawkinson. That wasn't the case because Justin Simmons had him on an island. David Njoku, you mentioned it, had a ton of targets, but did have seven catches for 56 yards, was able to be tight end 4. No other real notables here. TJ Hawkinson did finish as a top 10 guy. So Minnesota had 2 top 10 tight ends going up against this Broncos defense. Again, keep that in mind. Dalton Kincaid, I think he continues his run where he didn't have double-digit fantasy points, but still active. He did have double-digit fantasy points, 10.6. But I think that what's more important is that he continues to be utilized in this Bills offense. He saw the lowest snap percentage that he's seen since the bye week, second lowest, I should say, 67% outside of that game versus New England. But 7 targets. I mean, he's going to be continued to be featured in this offense. He's one of the key members of this offense as of right now, right alongside of Stephon Diggs. I really love Dalton Kincaid going rest of the season. Trey McBride, who was my start of the week, did finish as a top 10 guy, but just missed double-digit fantasy points. But love to see him still being targeted heavily. Last week, where he was tight end 1, had 9 targets. This week, where he's still a top 10 guy, did have 7 targets as well. So he is a key part of this Arizona offense, whether it's Kyler Murray or not. But with Kyler Murray at the quarterback, you just love his situation that much more.
Yeah, we don't have a ton of tight end duds. I mean, there's really only 2 guys that were probably started and probably hurt you. That's Jake Ferguson, who went 3 for 32, and Sam Laporta, who went 3 for 18. Bit of a strange game for the Lions. They struggled for like 3.5 quarters of this game. Jared Goff threw multiple interceptions. Amon-Ra St. Brown, he still had a good game, but for Amon-Ra, it was like 77 yards. Like, oh, this is kind of a down week for Amon-Ra. He did have a touchdown, though. But yeah, 3 for 18. Weird game for the Lions, but those are probably really the only 2 tight ends. Evan Ingram didn't have a great game either. I don't think anyone else is really starting like Michael Mayer or anything like that. So yeah, overall, the tight ends that were started were pretty decent, and these are really the only 2 that disappointed.
Do you see Evan Ingram's the most targeted player without a touchdown? I think he has over 70 targets, no touchdown.
Yeah,
that's brutal.
Jacoby Myers.
He's the new Jacoby, and he's the new Deontay Johnson.
Facts.
Not. I mean, 2 good players. So maybe you keep an eye on Evan Ingram. All right, now we're gonna go on to the last portion of our show. But again, before we do that, if you guys haven't already, drop a like on this video. It helps us out. We appreciate it greatly. If you aren't already subscribed to the YouTube channel, come on, guys. What are you doing? Go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Turn on the notifications so you know when we go live, like nights like tonight. We wanted to go live tonight because we knew that we'd be here after the Chiefs and Eagles, and we had a little bit of an inclination that the Chiefs were going to lose and be a little bit extra special for you guys to listen to at the beginning of our show. But again, we're going to drop usually every Sunday night, every Thursday night. Riv Academy has been getting going. That's great. I think he's going to be starting dropping his videos on Saturdays. And then Joel Moran, you know he's a loose cannon. He drops whenever he wants to. But turn that notification on so you know that when we drop our videos. And again, if you guys have any comments, any questions, go ahead and drop that below. But let's move on to the last segment of our show, the waiver wire segment, where we hook you guys up with solid waiver ads. If you guys have these guys available, these are guys that should not be and should be picked up. First thing that we're going to go by, we're going to start at the running back position with Aaron Jones having the injury issues and having his concern. I don't love A.J. Dillon, but I think that if he's going to get starting opportunity, it's hard to pass up on a number 1 running back. He's rostered and fit in about 60% of leagues. Going up against Detroit this week, not the most ideal matchup, but with running backs, you take opportunity over everything.
Yeah, Detroit, Kansas City the next 2 weeks, Giants, Tampa Bay. Not great. We don't really know the extent of Aaron Jones' injury, but like I mentioned earlier, we're probably expecting at minimum 1 week. It's more likely going to be 2, 3. IR probably a possibility there too. So yeah, I mean, he's going to get work. He got 14 carries for 29 yards against the Chargers, so I don't feel great about it. But yeah, if you're desperate, absolute dire need, must start a guy this week, and there's nobody else, A.J. Dillon's going to get 14 touches.
We talked about Zach Charbonnet before. We're, of course, going to have to bring him up now. Rostered in 50% of leagues with Kenneth Walker and his injury issue right now. Not sure how long and the severity of that injury. Zach Charbonnet going up against San Francisco. Not the most ideal matchup is on a Thursday, but I think rest of the season, especially with the volume that he's already seeing with Kenneth Walker on the field, I think that without him, he's definitely the most obvious pickup this week.
Yeah, he's the matchups are ugly. It's San Francisco, Dallas, San Francisco, Philly, and then Tennessee, Pittsburgh, week 17, the championship game. don't get scared if you're on Sleeper and you see all of the red. He's someone this past week who had 85% of snaps. Now, I don't think 85% is going to be every week. I'm sure they'll elevate someone else on the practice squad or bring somebody in, but he's going to get all of the work. You know, he got 15 carries, only turned to 47 yards, but 6 receptions. The week before that, 4 receptions. Talked about Rachaad White. You don't have to be this insane prolific rusher. If you're going to get more than 4, 5, 6 receptions a game, you're going to be extremely relevant.
Next name is going to be Ty Chandler. I mentioned it. He had himself a solid ball game against the Broncos. Week before that versus New Orleans, did have double digits. This week on only 31% opportunities. Finishes as a top 15 running back. Had 10 attempts for 73 yards. A lot of those yards did come off that one fake punt on 4th down where he was able to rush for, I think it was 30 yards. But on the ground, and the receiving aspects, did have 4 targets, brought in all 4 for 37 yards. You can get him for cheap. I think that with Alexander Mattison and his fumbling woes, I would not be surprised if they gave Ty Chandler some more opportunity. You're going to have people going after a Zach Charbonnet, maybe even an A.J. Dillon. I think very sneakily you can go and you can pick up Ty Chandler and he'd be a solid option for you.
I like that too. He was someone that we were talking up because we thought Madison might have missed some time, because Denver's defense, even though it has improved, they have been vulnerable on the ground. So again, like Drew mentioned, this is someone that you could probably throw a $0 bid, a $1 bid on if you have the roster spot available.
At the wide receiver position, not too many names that I'm really glossing over. Maybe now that he's back, Zay Jones, don't really love that. I think that's more so predicated off of seeing Calvin Ridley have success. But again, Zay Jones hasn't been anything special, missed a lot of time. Does have 2 weeks when he has played over double digits. Going up against Tennessee, though, in his first game back was all right. 4 catches, 20 yards. I think I'm going to stay away, but definitely one to monitor. Brandon Cooks has been solid. Last week against the Giants, we saw him finish as a top 3 guy. This week, where the script really wasn't in Dallas's favor to pass the ball, saw 3 catches for 42 yards. I think he's someone that should be picked up, in my opinion. Is rostered in almost 63% of leagues. So if he's available for you, like he's available in some of my leagues, maybe you go out there and you get a Brandon Cooks. Romeo Doubs, I don't think that he should be on waivers. He's been a touchdown machine. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if he was near double digits. Yeah, he's at 7 touchdowns this season. If Romeo Doubs is on your waiver wire, pick him up. He'd be a solid flex option for you. Same with Jaden Reed. We've seen him be pretty awesome these last 2 weeks as well. Finished as a top 12 guys in back-to-back weeks. This past week, we saw him really active in the rushing game where he had 3 carries, 46 yards, and a touchdown. Week before that, 84 receiving yards and a touchdown. I think with Christian Watson, didn't he get into the end zone too? But even with Christian Watson, his ups and downs, we're seeing Jaden Reed be featured more in this offense. So he's another guy that I'm actively looking at, only rostered in 42% of leagues. Now,
the only other name I want to bring up. Sorry,
okay,
we're going to move on to tight ends.
No, that's fine. Go ahead.
Because the one other name is Odell. I know he had that injury end of the game, but it seems like it's nothing serious. He's only rostered in 41% of leagues. And these last 3 weeks, what's concerning is his snap percentage. He's playing like 30 to 40% of snaps. I'm not exactly sure why. Of course, the Ravens run the ball a ton, but these last 3 weeks, 56 yards and a touchdown, 40 yards and a touchdown, and over 100 yards this past week on Thursday Night Football. We know the talent Odell has. And this is a team that's going to need pass catchers now. Mark Andrews is out, and this receiving room was already extremely thin. So Odell Beckham, not going crazy, breaking the bank on spending him, but he's someone that has upside. He's someone that I love Zay Flowers, but he's shown that he's been more productive than Zay Flowers these last couple of weeks. So go out there, put a $1 or $2 bid on Odell Beckham if you need a flex play.
And at tight end, I think the only tight end worth mentioning right now, Isaiah Likely, with the idea that Mark Andrews is going to be out for potentially the rest of the season. Isaiah Likely has been able to do a job in the past. This past week, we saw him with Mark Andrews being out, play 74% of snaps. That's the highest since week 1, the week that Mark Andrews did not play, where he played 72% of snaps as well. And I think rest of the season, you have the Chargers, you have your bye week, but then the Rams, Jacksonville, San Fran, not an ideal matchup. But then Miami. Miami's a tricky one because we've seen their defense play relatively well these last 2 weeks. But versus the Chargers, the Rams, and Jacksonville, those are solid matchups. especially in this offense with the Baltimore Ravens. I really like the pickup. He becomes a priority add if you are one of those that were affected by the Mark Andrews injury.
Yeah, it's likely's tough because he has the talent, but we've seen the downside. Week 1, put up a goose egg. This past week, played 74% of snaps. That was great, but saw 2 targets in total, 0 receptions, got a flag called on him. But the upside is there. We saw it last year. Tampa Bay game sticks out where Andrews is out and he goes crazy. So this week going up against the Chargers, you could do a lot worse in a tight end landscape that really only has maybe 7 or 8 guys that excite you. If you're one of those other couple teams in your 10 or 12 man league who has been searching for a tight end, going through these guys, whether it's Evan Ingram or Gerald Everett, whoever it may be, pick up likely this week.
I'm with you, brother. Now that's going to do it from us over here at the Fantasy React.
One super chat.
I love how diligent you are with the super chats. Shout out to Aaron. He says, "What's up, guys? And why do the Chiefs forget how to play offense in the second half?" That's a question for Patrick Mahomes, the best quarterback in the league, one of the best quarterbacks we've ever seen, right? That's up to him and why he forgets how to play football in the second half. That's also up to Andy Reid, one of the best play callers that this game's ever seen, a guy that Patrick Mahomes has actually been lucky enough to work with his entire career. Also, maybe in due part to Eric Bieniemy no longer being with the team. Maybe this offense just lacks juice and excitement now that Eric Bieniemy's over there in Washington. Maybe that's just something to note. Interesting. But let's not make it about something bigger than what it might actually be. But let's wrap up the show, Mr. Dehls. Episode 23 coming to an end. Again, if you guys made it this far, we appreciate you. If you guys could like the video, we'd appreciate that very much. Go ahead and drop that down below. If you're not subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do that now. But that's going to wrap up from us over here at the Fantasy Reaction Show. We'll be back here Thursday night breaking down the starts of the week.